It was more than just its name that had changed.
The sociology department was to, at least an initial intent of it, was to help workers out, to educate them away from bad habits such as smoking and drinking, to advise them if they were troubled. And it started that way, and then gradually it rather turned into a police department.
The servicemen, as they were now called, set up close ties with the police, trading information on workers who had broken the liquor laws. Alcohol on your breath or in your home meant you were fired on the spot. Ford recommended calling out the Army and Navy to get prohibition enforced nationwide. But force, he recognized, was not the whole answer. We must educate the people, Ford said, and he set out once again to uplift the culture of those around him.
Hop right up and hop right down and turn your honey and turn her around. Don't be sly and don't be slack. Meet your honey, turn her back. Eleman, Joe. Right to your partner and around you go.
Ford organized square dances for employees and their families.
And this was all part of Henry's idea of trying to sell the American dream as he dreamed it. Folk dances were a good, energetic, non-sexy way of having fun. And he promoted them diligently.
When you went to the Charleston, you became a bum, a vagrant, a nut. Hell, I really feel as though we were telling our parents, be gone. I'm releasing myself from your jurisdiction. I want to do the Charleston.
The Charleston, jazz, speakeasies, the rebellion of youth, they all became part of the great spectacle of the 20s. This is how the myth of the jazz age was born, even if that age wasn't half as sinful as it pretended to be.
As I look back through it all now, there was a great innocence about it.
Feet up, toes in, toes out, back to the Charleston. 4 bars I'm doing. Charleston, crossover, knees over, back to Charleston, get in there, kick high, kick back, Charleston, and then off the log, over, off the log, and I would have about 6 steps. And then the last chorus, I would fly. I would just fly my feet in the air in the Charleston, and up would go my feet up and back, and I was in control the most of the time.
Prohibition and progress. Together, they were supposed to create a better, more orderly world. It wasn't working out that way. At first, the lawlessness of prohibition seemed innocent enough, but it would soon take a nasty turn. Each summer night during the 20s, cruise lines toured the waters of Detroit.
Oh, it was just beautiful. You know, you'd go out and look at the sky. You saw all the stars and the moon was shining on the river. They had music there and we danced, and you could buy pop and hot dogs and all that. So we were dancing, and then we heard the shots. My brother-in-law, he was at the rail. One of the bullets hit his arm right below the elbow. So he said, "Oh, I'm shot."
The agencies were inept. The chief targets often seemed to be the innocent, who were pleasure boating. There'd be an enforcement drive going on, they'd be shot at. They become the victims, and they're outraged, and they turn against prohibition as a result.
And Arthur, the fellow that was shot, he never got a penny out of this. He had a brand new suit on at the night of the shooting, and they ruined his suit. He never got reimbursed for that.
Now that the ice has disappeared, the U.S. Customs Patrol Fleet starts its annual game of hide and seek with rum, dope, alien, or what have you smugglers along the Detroit River and the Great Lakes. And they can smell hooch a mile away.
It was the crookedest, most asinine outfit you ever saw in your life. The customs officers were the ones that were after the booze, but they were all paid off.
By the late 20s, the Detroit River had become a national embarrassment. The federal government poured money and men into the area. The result? Petty smugglers moved out of the business, and the liquor trade was taken over by organized crime. The syndicates.
They wasn't afraid. These guys wasn't afraid, and most of these guys had a guy alongside of them that was a guy that carried a gun in case anybody stopped them. They meant business, you know.
The gangs were going after each other for territory, and it was on. Everybody was for themselves. And of course, the rough stuff really started. That's when they started rounding everybody up. I was one of them. They'd just pick you off the street and bring you in for questioning. Hundreds.
In various cities, various gangs or various ethnic groups got supremacy. St. Louis was heavily Irish gangs. Chicago with Al Capone was heavily Italian. Detroit ended up heavily Jewish with the so-called Purple Gang run by the Bernstein brothers, Izzy and Abe and Ray and Joe.
I was working for a man called Bernstein, who owned the Polar Bear, and he was the kingpin of the best whiskey in the world.
Well, Ray was a affable roughneck who ultimately went to jail for murder.
When we first started to work there, he let us know that he had a favorite song. He had, and one of his favorite songs was about his mother. I'd see him walk in, and if he was smiling and all that, I'd go to, "My Yiddish mama, I miss her more than ever now. My Yiddish mama, I long to kiss that wrinkled brow. I long to hold her hand once more as in days gone by, and ask her to forgive me for the things I did to make my mama cry. Oh, I know."
The gangsters became part of the spectacle of Prohibition. In Detroit, most of the violence consisted of one gang shooting at another. And for a long time, nobody seemed to take it very seriously.
Mama mine. Well, he would grin. He would be so happy. Yeah, you talk about a guy enjoying a number. It seemed to get him right there.
Who's gonna care? Who's gonna cry? Who's gonna worry if I live or I die? Say who? I'm wondering who. Now tell me who's gonna fret? Who's gonna frown? Who'll be unhappy if I don't come around? Say who? I'm wondering who.
Over time, the Jewish gangsters were either killed or jailed. They were replaced by a group of Sicilians, La Mano Nera, the Black Hands, forerunner of the Mafia. It was during Prohibition that organized crime became a national force.
If there hadn't been Prohibition, you probably would have gotten organized crime in one way or another, but this gave it its great impetus because it put the money in it. And then, as time went on during Prohibition, the gangs got into other things, such as gambling and prostitution.
These guys used to come from Detroit. They were black hands, and I think I heard a lot of people say it was part of the mafia would come down. They'd come down in these great big brand new kind of Lincolns and Cadillacs, you know, and they'd all be smoking cigars. These guys didn't smoke cigarettes them days. It was cigars, you know, all these great big stogies these guys smoked, you know. They'd have a chauffeur and they'd drive them down there and open the door and they'd go upstairs and go gambling, you know.
By the end of the 20s, kidnappings and extortion had become commonplace in Detroit. Henry Ford felt his own family was directly at risk. At his request, an understanding was worked out. The gangs agreed to stay away from the Ford family. In return, the Ford Service Department would provide jobs to underworld figures. The gangsters and the old sociological department. It was an unholy marriage, but it held.
And it led to the hiring of a lot of hoodlums, many of them just out of prison. And they became a rough, tough outfit.